Hello, and thank you for clicking on this session of Imbibe Live Online, part of Global Bar Week. My name's Pete Brown. I'm a beer writer, and before I was a beer writer, I worked in advertising and marketing. I still do a bit of consultancy to the industry. If you want my details about that, then I'll give them at the end. But my latest book combines my two loves, my previous career and my current one. It's about design in the beer world. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and talk for the next 20 odd minutes or so about why beer design is an interesting subject and an interesting enough subject for a book. Basically, design is central to selling beer. It doesn't matter if you brew the best beer in the world. Something's got to make people pick it up and look at it. So what I'm going to talk about now is why beer design has gone from being quite staid to being the most creatively exciting and adventurous sector in the whole of packaging design in any sector in the world, and why that's happened and what that means for us. For about 5 years, I was chair of the Beer Marketing Awards, a scheme that myself and some colleagues set up. And we had different categories for everything from TV advertising, print, PR, sponsorship, that kind of thing. Some years we would find that the brand packaging design category had more entries than all the rest of the awards categories put together. This is the place where people are really competing, and for good reason. If we think about it now, we're in a very, very crowded marketplace. Over the last 20 years, we've gone from about 500 breweries in the UK to about 2,500. Each one of those breweries, the vast majority of them, produce more than one beer. Some of them have core ranges, seasonal ranges, collaboration brews, and the amount of shelf space is not increasing. People are gradually drinking less. People are going to the pub less. Shopping is obviously with COVID moving more online. So if you're making a great beer, how on earth do you get noticed in this crowded marketplace? Design is absolutely crucial to standing out on shelf, also to fitting in on shelf. The design sometimes follows codes which says this is a craft beer, this is a lager, and so on. But being distinctive enough that someone is going to pick up your bottle. So how and why does that work? Well, brand packaging and branding works on a number of different levels, and you probably know a lot of this, but just to recap, I think it's worth looking at. At its simplest, a brand is a statement of ownership and a promise of quality. The reason why Bass was the first trademark in the UK was that people were constantly ripping off its design, creating inferior beers and pretending that they were Bass. And so Bass sought legal protection to stop this from happening. And now we have millions of trademarks all around the place. The reason that's important is that that red triangle shows you that this bottle of Bass is going to taste the same as every bottle of Bass you've just had. Brands are so important because they're a guarantee of quality. You expect every bottle of Heinz tomato ketchup, every can of Coke, every bar of Cadbury chocolate to taste the same as the last thing that you picked up with that brand on it. Consistency and quality are the absolute benchmarks and hallmarks of what branding is all about. But it's gone a lot further than that now, and it's become something that's a lot more sort of intricate in its relationship with us and in our lives. A brand is also an expression of personality or values. We now, for pretty much any product you can think of, have a massive choice of brands. If you go into a supermarket at a typical category, you've got the mainstream brand, the brand leader. You've got the premium version. You've got the number two, the challenger. And then you've probably got the budget version. And then within that, you've got a lot of other different nuances, that maybe the local version, this kind of thing. A lot of these cues are embedded deeply in the visuals of the brand. And we've learned to read these cues almost at a subconscious level. We know that what looks like a craft brand. We know what looks like a quality brand. We know what looks like a budget brand in ways that we might even not be able to articulate, but we just know. I've put this example up here, Camden, because Camden Town is Camden Town. It's well known throughout the world as a kind of bohemian, alternative cultural hotspot, and there's something in this just a purely typographic route which brings that out, which expresses the personality of Camden and tells a drinker what to expect from these beers. But it works on an even deeper level than that. A lot of these cues go even deeper to places where only neuroscientists can explain them, really. I just want to show you this quick example. This is Barney's beer from Edinburgh, Summerhalls in Edinburgh. And Barney is a big collaborator with the Edinburgh Science Festival. I don't know if you've ever heard of Professor Charles Spence at Oxford, but he does a lot of work with multisensory cues and how different things affect our decisions and affect our perceptions of what we're experiencing. And these two labels here were designed as part of a proper experiment at the Edinburgh Science Festival. These three beers were launched. One was in brown paper, plain label packaging, and then these two beer labels that you can see here on screen. And drinkers were asked which ones they preferred in terms of taste, freshness, quality, and so on. Now, the label here with the yellow and the green scored consistently higher on all these attributes. People were 30% more likely to buy it after drinking this compared to drinking the one with the red and the orange. And you've probably guessed the punchline. They were absolutely the same beer. Inside the bottles. It was from the same batch. The bottles were filled before the labels went on. There was absolutely no difference between the contents, but people perceived a genuine flavour difference based on the fact that only the label was different between the beers. So this is all embedded into commercial packaging. We know that these light, bright citrus colours bring an expectation of bright citrusy flavours and things like that. And these things happen at all different levels of communication. So there's a lot that's going into a branded design, an awful lot. And that's why when we look at big brands, they tend to be quite conservative in their design. It changes minimally over the years. And it works in several different ways. There's a lot of different elements that all add up to it. So type is a hugely important factor. And this is just a little experiment that I've done based on my friend Sarah Heinemann, who's a professional typographer, and does some great lectures and talks on the role of type and typefaces and fonts. And we expect different fonts to have different personalities. So here I've written Cascale, Continental Lager, and Craft Beer in 3 different fonts. And just take a second to look at it. You probably think that each one of these feels right in a particular font. Now, I'm not a professional typographer, so I've not done this perhaps as well as it could be. But to me, Craft Beer feels absolutely right in the 3rd font. Continental Lager feels right in the middle font, and Cascale feels right in the top font. I'd be interested to know if you feel the same, or if you're thinking, what the hell is he talking about? This is a load of rubbish. But we expect different fonts, different typefaces to have even different personalities. Sarah conducted an experiment where 3 typefaces went into a pub. And she asked people which typeface would order what drinks. And Helvetica, the clean sans serif everyman font, ordered a pint of lager. Times New Roman, the classic serif font, is sophisticated, ordered a glass of white wine. And the font everyone loves to hate, Comic Sans, got a round of shots in. So people, that was kind of a fairly consistent reading among quite a large sample size in the experiment that Sarah did. So type itself is very important. Also, logos are hugely important. I bet you can recognize the bottom left one, even though for some reason a lot of it has disappeared. But the point here being, this is a very popular pub quiz question, to take out the names from logos and see if you can still recognize the brands. And I'd be surprised if anyone watching this talk struggles to identify any of these brands without the words that normally come with them. We know what logos are. Logos encode a huge amount of visual information within themselves. And then finally, of course, there's naming. So not finally, but naming. Names are very important. They suggest quite a lot of stuff. It's become such a cliche now with real ale names. This is how you can come up with your own real ale name. This is something I dug out on the internet. So you start with your mum's first initial. So mine's is going to be Fletcher's. My first initial is going to be P as well. So my real ale name is Fletcher's Zesty Ferret Warrior. Fletcher's Zesty Ferret Warrior. It passes muster. It could absolutely be a name. Obviously, naming conventions change depending on what kind of beer you're launching. Names began with just the surname of the brewer, the Carlsbergs, the Heinekens, the Guinnesses. It might be that you claim ownership over where you are, London Pride, Harvest Sussex Best, that kind of thing. And then naming obviously has become a lot more esoteric with craft beer, with things like Wu Gang Chops the Tree and My Toe Hurts Betty, and anything that just sounds a little bit different from breaking the conventions of what we're used to. And finally, visuals. This is an interesting one because traditionally beer hasn't made much use of visuals. Visuals can date quite quickly and then can polarize people as well. If we do see visuals in beer design, it tends to be your top left, your classic kind of hops, beer ingredients, that kind of thing. Maybe tankards, hop binds, all that kind of stuff, which is saying it's traditional. It's maybe rural, maybe timeless. You might see visuals top right. This is the Jolly Monk from the Franziskaner German beer, enjoying himself, and you don't see much more of that. And visuals tend to be, for smaller brands, they tend to be guests, they tend to be seasonals. But craft has made a much bigger use of visuals. We might have natural landscapes, they're quite popular. I've put a photograph up here because until recently, you would have, if you were going to put a natural landscape on there, it would have been an illustration, a painting, something like that. Photography just didn't belong on beer packaging. Now it does. A craft brand is trying to do exactly the same, evoke the same connotations and connections with the countryside, would these days be highly likely to use photographs rather than lines or illustrations. And I might even have an example of that later on. And then characters. The little bear at the bottom there is Tiny Rebel's kind of mascot and appears on all their labels. So visuals are becoming much more commonplace in beer design. So we've got fonts, names, visuals and logos all working together, all adding different layers to packaging design, all communicating different things, which we perceive often in the blink of an eye and process at a very rapid subconscious level. All this leads to a lot of information being encoded within even the most mainstream beers. I chose Heineken because there are scores of different beers around the world that look very much like it. The classic green bottle, the racetrack shape around the logo, some kind of symbol in there, and there's lots of things that are happening in here. If you kind of look at it closer, there's a lot going on. So this, for example, I'll not go through all of these, but this central brand symbol that suggests a brand specific story or legend. Here we've got the red star, which apparently dates back to the stars that brewers would hang over these open fermenters back in the day in order to kind of ward away evil spirits, or as we now call them, microbial infections. Thing about the typeface of the Heineken is that since the 1950s, the E has been tilted so that it's smiling, so it looks more approachable. At the same time, the Heineken logo moved from being block capitals to lowercase to make it seem friendlier and more approachable, which is something that Heineken, the company, perhaps have forgotten because they always write the word Heineken in block capitals all the way through every single press communication they issue, like a child does when it learns its name for the first time. We've got the Heineken name on a scroll to suggest that this is serious, it's premium, it's important. If the beer has any kind of heritage whatsoever, you're going to get the year it was established on there. Any medals and awards, even the ones that beer writers such as myself have never heard of or been invited to judge, foil to do premiumness. So there's all sorts of different messages being communicated here, not just the name of the beer and the type that's on there. And this happens with any professional piece of design. There's so much value engineered into this. There's so much meaning going on in an apparently simple piece of labeling design. A lot of these cues and a lot of the traditional cues in beer tend to relate. If you ever talk to a semiotician, they're quick to pick out church, state, and authority as some of the really common themes that endure in established beer brands. Beer can be seen, I guess, as a little bit trivial culturally. It's not important. Certainly, when I first started writing about beer, people say, "Have you thought about getting a proper job writing about beer?" That's not really proper, is it? And beer wants to be taken more seriously. So we have a lot of connections. If there's any kind of religious connection with a brand, then the brand will make it, whether that's Belgian Abbey beers or whatever. And there's a lot of gold, there's a lot of coats of arms, there's a lot of heraldry, a lot of saying this is serious, this has substance, this is a brand that's been around for a long time, and it is safe, and it is normal, and it is serious. There's not so much of this idea of hey, this is beer, let's open them and have a good time and get a bit pissed, because you can't, of course. You'll get the Portman group breathing down your neck. So people tend to go to the other extreme. And this can lead, this is an observation that I had a few years ago, this can lead to big beer brands taking themselves a little bit too seriously and losing touch. We went through this stage where beer was commoditized, where it was being sold in supermarkets, mainly in price discount, and people just thought, well, beer is beer, it all tastes the same. And so we saw the kind of leading brands trying to get themselves taken more seriously, try to build some premium quality back into the brand. And so we get this kind of collective notion of beers being seen as objects to be worshipped. You know, this is the king of beers. This is a trophy. This is served in a chalice, not a glass. This is a designer label item. This is kind of like choirs of angels singing from the heavens. It's all a bit weird because it's lost touch with what mainstream lager is all about. Back in my marketing days, where we did focus groups with lager drinkers, and he said, if this brand came to life, what kind of person would it be? They're a good brand that people loved. It would always be, well, it's like your slightly smarter best mate, isn't it? It's the guy in the pub who always gets the first round. It's the guy who's got the funniest jokes. It was always guys, to be fair, back in those days. And this has lost all of that. If these brands came to life in a pub, as they're manifested here, I'm not criticizing the brands directly, merely these executions. If these brands came to life and walked into a pub, they'd be aloof, they'd be arrogant, they wouldn't talk to you. So it's this losing touch that mainstream brands went through that kind of opened the door to allow craft to be a bit more creative and to take that space and say, we're the normal brands, we're the down-to-earth brands, we're the brands that you can really relate to. But this was the mainstream. This was kind of, hey, here we are, we're royalty, we're authority, we've been around for years, we're very serious. And so when craft came in, it was a revolution. It's absolutely no surprise that when BrewDog launched in 2007, they totally adopted the imagery of punk and the aesthetic of punk and the language of punk. There were craft beers before BrewDog in terms of the liquid that was in the bottle, but BrewDog established the attitude of craft, and it's very much about being anti-establishment. It's about being punk. It's about sticking two fingers up. And it's great when you look back on this design now, because it's, you know, BrewDog have now been through two different designs since this. They launched their third label design last year, and they've grown up. You know, they want to be seen now as a bit more serious, a bit more not punk but maverick, not quite an outsider, but doing things differently. And this is very much, you know, kind of cut up typefaces, spray paint, all that kind of stuff. They're really saying we are not part of this serious establishment. And for a while, every craft beer looked like punk, looked like BrewDog. Everything was kind of saying, this is amateurish, this is buy a guitar, learn three chords, get up on stage, anyone can do this. And that was very exciting for a while. And like punk, you know, a movement like that only lasts for a few years before it starts to grow up, before it starts to become a bit more sophisticated. And different things then begin to happen at quite a dizzying rate. So this leads us to the rule book of brand building being ripped up. All those rules that we looked at with Heineken, all those conventions, they're shared by every mainstream brand, and things move very minimally and very slowly. And then in 2012, we get Beavertown, who basically, if there was a book about good branding techniques, they're setting it on fire and chucking it in a skip. And Nick Dwyer, the guy who designed this, said to me, we just kind of didn't know there was a book. It wasn't that we tore it up. We just didn't know it was there. And so they did their own thing. And this is 4 stages of evolution of gamma ray. And you can see it becoming more colorful, more anarchic, very much rooted in popular culture and kitsch. It's kind of Star Wars, Star Trek, Dan Dare. You don't even have to get the references to like it. And the reason this has been so successful is that, particularly by the time we get to the final iteration here on the bottom right, you could take anything off here. You could take any words off here. If you see those skeletons and those skulls and those flying saucers on a mural, on a poster, on the side of a van, you know it's Beavertown without there being any text there. It's such a distinct visual identity. So it actually works as very successful brand building in a completely different way to how conventional brands work. And that's why, again, after this came out, suddenly everyone was going kitsch pop culture, imitating Beavertown rather than imitating Brewdog. And the dial moved yet again. And then craft beer grew even further and grew up even further and spread. And we got the remembering that beer is a cultural product. Instead of looking at hops and heritage, and we've been around for so long, craft decided to kind of look at beer as, no, this is part of our culture, which includes music, it includes fashion, it includes jokes, comics, humor, sci-fi. In researching the book with the 200 odd brewers that we've spoken to, an awful lot of them say our design aesthetic is informed by our love of music. It's informed by our love of skate culture. It's informed by our love of graphic design. And so we see this endless array of different stuff, which is quite deliberately trying not to look like beer. It's trying to break all those conventions, and it's trying to look like something that's part of the drinker's world rather than part of the beer world. And so ultimately we get to this point where the beer bottle becomes an art object. When Cloudwater launched in 2014, 2015, we can see there's actually some very good consistent principles of branding here. Every single one of these bottles, the logo is in the right place, the typeface is consistent, the information is quite minimal, but it's there. And everything's being done in a really kind of consistent way, so that you always know it's a Cloudwater bottle once you've seen one, if you see any other. And yet behind that, we've got work from different artists, we've got collage, we've got texture going on, making these like works of art to be cherished. And this was just at the time when the craft beer world was about to switch from bottles to cans. And so we now see the beer can as an even greater art object. Here, a designer has got 360 degrees canvas to play with, rather than just a label, the front of a label. We tend to see cans unwrapped. I've put this one up because this was a beer by 4Pure done for Tate Modern. For an exhibition at Tate Modern. This beer can was designed by Peter Saville, one of the greatest graphic artists alive today. I don't even know if he drinks beer, but he designed all the covers for New Order and Joy Division records, and is an absolute legend. And here he is designing a beer can, which gives you nothing whatsoever about the beer. You can't even be sure that it is a beer, but it's a wonderful art object that has all this information encoded in it. And if people are clever enough to get what's going on here, then, you know, they're going to like the beer. This does, of course, eventually lead us to this problem, the problem of, this is great, who's it from again? Here are 3 beer cans that I'm featuring in the book. I think they're all great pieces of design, but what are they? They're almost going out of their way to not give you the information that you're looking for. You see this on a shelf. I mean, who's it from? What beer style is it? How strong is it? And for some of these cans, you know, the information is on the other side. There's a back label there, just as there is with conventional beer branding. But this is just trying to intrigue you. It's trying to kind of hide itself and pull you in and ask you to do some of the work. This is a convention that originally began for seasonals, one-offs, guest beers, collaborations. The temporary nature of them was increased by people using self-adhesive labels rather than printed directly onto the can. So when you see it, you go, okay, this might not be around for very long. I'd better grab this right now while it's here, because I'll probably never see it again, and it's a collectible, desirable object. These conventions are now moving into mainstream design, into mainstream brands. And so we're starting to maybe get a little bit too far away from those core principles of branding that the first few waves of craft beers so brilliantly shattered. And so what we start to see now is growing and successful craft brands, not selling out to the man or becoming mainstream, but refining their design and learning or remembering some of the principles of good branding that were always there, and actually combining the kind of mainstream design learning, the kind of rule book stuff, with this brave, adventurous attitude, and it's working quite well. So Vocation are now the 5th biggest craft brand in the UK because they made a decision to really focus on supermarkets rather than the kind of little craft bubble. And so a couple of years, they were doing very, very well. And I think this is an example of something that wasn't broke, but has been fixed anyway. You can see that from the can on the left, you've got this aesthetic of kind of sailors' tattoos, that kind of imagery, and a lot of detail in there. And the detail's not getting in the way of the message, but they found that the message could be made a little bit clearer. So on the left, the logo at the top was simplified into the logo at the bottom. The brand name is made bigger. The detail about the beer is bigger. So this still looks different. It still looks craft, but the information that you need to know is now much, much clearer. And if you see the can on the right, the new can, without reference to the can on the left, you don't remember enough to think of it as changed. It still looks like Vocation. It still looks like it did. It just happens to be working a little bit harder commercially. Things have gone the other way as well. Not only are craft brands learning from classic mainstream branding principles, mainstream brands are learning from craft. So this is one of my favorite design case studies. Here we've got how the Guinness, the Guinness harp is probably the most famous beer logo in the world. You put it on top of a pint or whatever. You see the harp without anything else from Guinness. That's a bit, it's kind of similar to Beavertown in this way, in that you see that harp and you know what brand we're talking about. But you can see how the evolution of the harp shows you how design has gone over recent years. I think it's amazing that there was nearly 100 years before the first redesign, which simplified it a little bit. And then there was 13 years, and they get quicker and quicker until we had 2 redesigns, 97 and 2005. I mean, see the harp being reduced to this kind of flat, iconic. This is a general trend in logos, is that they start off being very literal and then become something very abstract. And Guinness found themselves with this logo and with it's kind of crossroads in the market, realizing that craft, this is about 2015, 2016, realizing that craft was making all the running, even if it was very small in volume terms. It was changing the way the category worked and changing the way the category felt. And so instead of just putting the word crafted on the side of the can, like some mainstream brewers have, they decided to make the Guinness harp more crafted in itself. And what they did was they wanted the harp to become something that you could actually play if it existed. And so it was done with sketches. They worked with harp makers in London and designed something that if it was real, it could play. And so they ended up with this. Which has got lots and lots of detail, lots of craft, lots of layers to it. This would not have happened without craft impacting mainstream. We've gone from minimalism, abstract iconography to a logo that's all about craft and workmanship. And none of this was even committed to digital media before it was all finished. Everything was done by hand. Everything was done offline and analog until it was finished, and then only then was it created into digital files. Which is a far cry from a lot of logos that have only ever existed in computerized form. Another example of this is Budweiser. This is the evolution of the Budweiser label. You can see an incredible amount of consistency. It changes gradually over time to fit with the sort of fashions of the time in ways that even probably hardened drinkers don't even notice. But we got to the stage where everything on this label was being done on a computer program. So the design agency JKR basically took every element of the design that you see on the left and employed 8 of the world's best lettering artists and illustrators to recreate every element by hand. As you can see on the right, there might not look to be too much difference, but the one on the right to me just reeks of quality and craft in a way that the one on the left just doesn't. It just looks flat, it looks anonymous. And they've won every award going for this design, and their sales have rebounded globally as a result of it. So people are seeing something in there that says quality, that says craft, even if they're not quite sure what that is. So what does all this mean after 8 months of COVID, well, it's changing the way that we buy. And one thing that I learned from researching this book, is that I used to say, one of my criticisms of some of the cans that you see there on the left was, you can't stand out on a supermarket shelf if everything is so riotous like that. How do you stand out from that? And it's getting very difficult. But I think the way that we're buying is changing. So I've put Hackney in on the right, because as soon as lockdown started, I started buying from local breweries, and Hackney is a local brewery to me. And instead of just kind of having 6-packs or plastic can rings or whatever, a lot of breweries now are using the overbox, the outer box, to kind of take their graphic design onto a bigger level. And these have real standout if you see them in a warehouse or on a shelf or anywhere. And it's when one of these arrives at your door, you feel pretty special, a lot more special than if you just get something in a Sainsbury's carrier bag or whatever. And also, because of this, I think we're getting a return to simplicity, we're getting a return to localism. Almasty actually set up as a brewery and were just ready to launch when lockdown hit. And so they just went, oh, we're screwed. And they realized that they were going to have to sell everything in cans through their online shop and their tap room. They realized that people needed to kind of see and recognize the brand from a standing start as quickly as possible. So they just went for this kind of minimalist look, where there's the information that you need. It's clear, it stands out. We were looking at Cloudwater earlier. They've introduced a core range of beers. And they still look like Cloudwater beers. They still look beautiful. But their core range all follow this sign of just kind of hazy color washes, just with the information that's there. Still great. They're both still great, but much more simple, much kind of, cutting things down in order to stand out, rather than turning everything up to 11 to stand out. But then maybe it's always been the way. 10 years on, the Colonel Brewery in Bermondsey is still regarded as one of the best craft breweries in the country, both for its beer and for its design. Now, when this label was first done, it literally was done with kind of letterpress stamps onto brown paper. When they went to a more sophisticated bottling line, they decided to keep that look. Minimalism is one of the themes in my book, and the core of minimalism is that you take everything away until you can't take anything away anymore without it collapsing. And some of Colonel's competitors or peers or whatever have changed their design 3 or 4 times since this came out. Many of the brewers we contacted for the book, we would see design online, contact them to get high-res images, and they'd say, oh no, we're not doing that anymore, we've changed all that. Colonel still looks fresh, and also it's not being imitated, because how do you imitate it without it looking exactly the same? So there's a work of genius here, and I'm sure that Colonel's beers are still going to look like this in 10 years time from now, and people will still be commenting on what a great piece of design it is, because it's non-design almost. At the other end, things are going even more extreme. And when I made that point about not getting standouts on the supermarket shelf, perhaps I missed the point, because a lot of the brewers we spoke to said, oh yeah, check our Instagram feed out if you want to see what we're up to. And when someone does a label like this, so this is obviously a can this is a flat design that becomes wrapped around a can, and you can see that it's meant to be seen in its entirety. It's meant to be seen for the whole can, not just the bit that you can see at the front. In fact, when some of these designs get put around a can, you can't even read the whole name. You've actually got to kind of pick up the can and turn it around to see what it is. But this looks fantastic on Instagram. It looks fantastic on a smartphone or a screen where you've got that kind of I forgot what they call them, but the Apple screens that make the colors really leap out at you. And we're seeing a lot of this where someone will get that flat rolled out design and then impose the can on it to show this is obviously what comes in the can, but this is the whole label wraparound. And I'm increasingly seeing beers displayed like this. So with the intention being that the design is created not for the supermarket shelf or the bottle shop shelf, but for Instagram, where people can sit and look at it, absolutely love it, and then go into the online shop and order it from there. And this one, same again. I just think this is absolutely wonderful. Another very new brewery. And there's layers of meaning in here. This gorilla here is a local hero. Used to be in Bristol Zoo. So this is an icon of Bristol. I think there's a statue of him in the town hall or something. An icon of Bristol exploring the world, and the beer taking him around the world and beyond. And these just look great. And maybe they were never meant for a supermarket shelf. Maybe they were meant to be seen like this. And maybe that's how we're going to be buying our beer more often from now on. So just in conclusion then, the reason I've written this book is because of my twin loves of how marketing works, and of beer. And it's brilliant that, having once been very boring and stolid and staid, beer design is currently the most creative design sector of any commercial packaging sector in the world. Designers everywhere are looking at beer and copying it and being inspired by it. Craft and mainstream design are learning from each other. The mainstream is rediscovering authenticity and craft values, and craft brands are rediscovering classic branding principles and how to communicate. And the final point, it's the first point I make in the book: do you judge a book by the cover? Yes, people do. It's really important that brands invest in design, and really think about what they're doing, because it makes a huge difference. People are picking up beers based entirely on their design, and collecting them and coveting them. So I hope that was interesting. It's certainly interesting to me. I could rattle on about it for hours. The book is being published by Camera. It's coming out in November. I think it was currently slated for November the 19th. And it's two things. One, it's designed to tell you how branding works. There's quite a lot of words from me about the way that logos work, about the way that design works, about all these different principles. But more than that, it's a visually stunning book. It's a visually luscious book, full of all these wonderful designs, being given space to breathe on the page. So it's a great coffee table book. So it's educational for anyone thinking about design, and it's also a perfect gift book for that difficult to buy beer-loving member of your family. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for taking part in Imbibe Live Online, part of Global Bar Week. You can watch this session back on demand at any time. And if you're interested in talking to me further about this, to do any kind of other talks, or even to chat to you about your own design, then I'm Pete Brown Beer on all social media. And petebrown.net is my website, and I can be contacted directly from there. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you share some other fantastic sessions in Imbibe Live Online. Cheers.